A judge laughed at a veteran single dad in court. But when his little girl revealed his silver star, everything changed. So what secret could be so powerful it makes a judge drop all charges? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. John Miller stood before Judge Rebecca Lawson, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of his suit jacket. The courthouse's fluorescent lights felt harsh and unforgiving, much like the eyes fixed upon him. His military training had taught him to face enemy fire, but nothing had prepared him for this battlefield. "Mr. Miller," the opposing lawyer's voice cut through the air like a knife, "can you explain to the court how you plan to provide stability for your daughter when you can't even maintain steady employment?" John's throat tightened. The truth was complicated. The nightmares, the startled reactions to sudden noises, the endless job interviews that went nowhere once they learned about his service history. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was Emily. He glanced back at his daughter, sitting in the last row. Emily's small hands clutched her favorite doll, the one her mother had given her before passing away. Her bright eyes met his, full of trust that broke his heart. I'm doing my best," John managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I pick up work where I can. Construction, security." "Your Honor," the lawyer interrupted, adjusting his expensive tie with manicured fingers. "Mr. Miller's inconsistent employment history is just the beginning. We have documentation of concerning behavior patterns consistent with PTSD. This condition makes him volatile, unpredictable. I would never hurt my daughter." John's voice cracked with emotion. "Emily is everything to me." Judge Lawson leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Her expression was a mixture of weariness and skepticism. Years of hearing similar stories had left her hardened to tearful pleas. "Mr. Miller," she said, her tone clipped, "this court sees dozens of parents every week who claim their children are everything to them. Yet they can't provide basic stability. No lawyer?" She gestured at the empty space beside him. "Did you think you could handle this alone?" John's face flushed. "I couldn't afford." "Couldn't afford?" Judge Lawson's laugh was sharp and sudden, echoing through the courtroom. "Mr. Miller, if you can't afford legal representation, how do you expect to provide for a child?" The humiliation burned through John's chest. He'd faced Taliban fighters with less fear than he felt now. His hands trembled slightly, and he pressed them against his legs to steady them. The opposing lawyer's smirk grew wider. "Your Honor," the lawyer continued smoothly, "Mr. Miller's financial instability is just one aspect of our concern. His service record indicates, 'My daddy helps people.'" Emily's voice rang out suddenly from the back of the courtroom. Heads turned as the 8-year-old stood up, still clutching her doll. "He's a hero!" The unexpected outburst created an immediate hush. John's heart clenched at his daughter's brave defense, even as he wished she wouldn't draw attention to herself in this cold place. Emily's clear, innocent voice continued in the silence. "He saved people. He has a special star to prove it." Judge Lawson's expression shifted slightly, her earlier amusement fading. "Young lady," she began, but Emily wasn't finished. "He works really hard." Emily's voice wavered, but remained strong. "He helps Mrs. Johnson with her garden when she can't bend down. He fixed Mr. Peterson's roof for free when it was leaking, and he reads to me every night, even when he's really tired." The courtroom remained silent, the earlier atmosphere of judgment temporarily suspended by the pure conviction in the child's voice. John stood straighter, drawing strength from his daughter's words, even as his eyes moistened. The opposing lawyer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, while this is touching, it doesn't address the very real concerns about Mr. Miller's capacity to—" "My daddy is a hero," Emily repeated firmly, her young voice filling the courtroom with an undeniable truth that cut through all the legal arguments and adult complications. A strange tension filled the air. The judge's earlier dismissive expression had vanished, replaced by something unreadable. The opposing lawyer's confident smirk faltered, and even the court reporter's fingers had stilled on her keyboard. In that moment, standing in his ill-fitting suit, John Miller was no longer just another case number. Through his daughter's eyes, the courtroom was forced to see him as he truly was. A father fighting with everything he had to keep his family together. A veteran who had given much for his country. And a man doing his best against overwhelming odds. Judge Rebecca Lawson leaned forward, her stern gaze shifting from John to Emily in the back of the courtroom. "Young lady, what did you say?" Emily stood straighter, her small hands still clutching her beloved doll. "I said my daddy is a hero, Your Honor. He really is." The judge's expression remained unchanged, but her voice softened slightly. "Would you care to explain that statement, Mr. Miller?" John's shoulders tensed. He'd never wanted to bring this up, especially not here. His hand moved to his pocket, where a small, dented metal box had rested every day since the custody battle began. He pulled it out slowly, its scratched surface catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Your Honor, His voice cracked. With trembling fingers he opened the box, revealing the silver star nestled in faded velvet. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The opposing lawyer, who moments ago had been so confident, fell silent. Judge Lawson's eyes widened, fixed on the metal. Emily's voice piped up again, clear and proud. "Daddy saved his whole team when the bad guys attacked. That's what Captain Roberts told me at the ceremony." She clutched her doll tighter. "He got hurt real bad doing it, but he saved everyone." John's throat tightened. He hadn't wanted Emily to know those details. But Captain Roberts had been so moved at the ceremony, he'd shared the story with her. Judge Lawson's hand gripped her gavel, her knuckles white. The stern facade cracked, revealing something raw underneath: pain, recognition, memory. She stared at the silver star as if seeing a ghost. "3 men," John said quietly, his voice steady for the first time since entering the courtroom. 3 men made it home to their families because... He swallowed hard. "Because sometimes you have to put others first." The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. Judge Lawson's eyes remained fixed on the metal, and something in her expression shifted. Those who knew her history might have recognized the shadow that crossed her face. The memory of another soldier, another hero who never made it home. "Your Honor," the opposing lawyer started to speak, but Judge Lawson raised her hand sharply. "The court will take a 30-minute recess." Her voice carried a slight tremor she couldn't quite hide. "We will reconvene after..." She paused, composing herself. "After I've had time to review some matters." The bang of her gavel echoed through the stunned courtroom. As people began to move, whispering among themselves, John carefully placed the silver star back in its box. His hands were steadier now, as if the weight of his secret being revealed had somehow lightened his burden. In the hallway outside, John crouched down to Emily's level. She rushed into his arms, and he held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. His little girl, his reason for fighting every day. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "I know you don't like talking about your medal, but I couldn't let them be mean to you anymore." John pulled back slightly, looking into his daughter's earnest face. Where others saw weakness in his struggles, Emily had always seen strength. Her faith in him had never wavered, not through the nightmares, not through the tight months when dinner was simple sandwiches, not through any of it. For the first time in months, John felt something new stir in his chest. It wasn't just determination or desperation. Those had been his constant companions throughout this custody battle. This was different. This was hope, fragile but real, like the first warm ray of sun after a long winter. "You never have to apologize for telling the truth, sweetheart," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Never." Emily beamed at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck once more. In that moment, as he held his daughter close, John realized that sometimes the biggest acts of courage don't happen on battlefields. Sometimes they happen in courtrooms, in the honest words of a child who sees heroes where others see only scars. Judge Rebecca Lawson closed her chamber door with trembling hands. The usually composed jurist sank into her leather chair, her stern facade crumbling as she stared at her reflection in the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across her desk, where family photos stood like silent witnesses to her shame. Her eyes fixed on a particular frame, a young man in dress uniform, his smile bright and confident. David, her little brother. The same brother who never came home, whose sacrifice was honored with a flag-draped coffin and a medal almost identical to the one John Miller had just shown in her courtroom. "Oh, David," she whispered, running her finger along the frame's edge. "What would you think of your big sister now?" The memory of her derisive laugh at John Miller's stumbling defense echoed in her mind, making her wince. She'd become exactly what she'd promised herself she never would. Another cold, cynical judge who'd forgotten the human stories behind the cases that crossed her bench. Rebecca stood, pacing her chambers. The walls, lined with law books and certificates, suddenly felt suffocating. How many times had she heard David speak of his brothers in arms, of the bonds forged in combat? How many times had he told her that heroes don't always look like the ones in movies? She paused at her window, watching people scurry across the courthouse steps below. John Miller's face flashed in her mind. Not the nervous, ill-fitting suit version from today, but the man revealed by that silver star. A man who'd run into danger to save others, just like David had. And she had laughed at him. The shame burned deeper as she remembered Emily Miller's voice, so clear and innocent. My daddy is a hero. Children often saw truth more clearly than adults, uncluttered by prejudice and presumption. Taking a deep breath, Judge Lawson straightened her robes and gathered her composure. She had made a mistake, but she had the power to begin correcting it now. When she re-entered the courtroom, the tension was palpable. John Miller stood at attention, an unconscious soldier's habit, while his daughter watched with hopeful eyes from her seat. The opposing lawyer wore a smirk that quickly faded under the judge's steely gaze. After careful consideration, Judge Lawson began, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with newfound humility. I am dismissing the current charges regarding Mr. Miller's fitness as a parent. The opposing lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, I must object. One military decoration doesn't... Counsel, she cut him off sharply. I'm not finished. She turned her attention to John. Mr. Miller, this court grants you continued custody of your daughter pending a full hearing, which will be scheduled in due course. However, she added, making sure to meet his eyes, I expect you to maintain steady employment and continue seeking appropriate support services for veterans. John's shoulders relaxed slightly as he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. The opposing lawyer gathered his papers with barely contained fury. This isn't over, he muttered, loud enough for John to hear. We'll be back with more evidence about your episodes. Judge Lawson's gavel cracked against the sound block. Counsel, would you care to share your remarks with the court? The lawyer forced a tight smile. No, Your Honor. We reserve the right to petition for a full hearing at a later date. So noted, she replied coolly. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out, Judge Lawson watched John Miller embrace his daughter. The sight stirred memories of David hugging her goodbye before his last deployment. She quickly gathered her papers, refusing to let emotion overwhelm her in open court. Outside the courthouse, the spring air carried the scent of newly bloomed flowers. John held Emily's hand as they walked down the steps, their shadows stretching long in the late morning Sunday. Daddy, Emily tugged at his sleeve. Can we get pancakes? I'm really hungry. John checked his worn wallet, counting the few bills inside. You know what, sweetheart? I think we can manage that today. They found a small diner 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind with slightly sticky menus and bottomless coffee. The red vinyl booths had seen better days, but the windows were clean and let in plenty of sunlight. Emily slid into the booth, her feet swinging happily beneath the table. Can I get chocolate chips in my pancakes? John smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in weeks. Just this once, he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. He could never resist when she asked for chocolate chip pancakes. As they waited for their food, Emily colored on her placemat with crayons provided by their friendly waitress. John watched her, marveling at how she could bounce back from the stress of the morning as if it were nothing more than a passing cloud. Daddy? She looked up from her drawing. Are you still worried? John reached across the table and squeezed her small hand. No, sweetheart, not right now. And it was true. The weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for months had lifted, at least for this moment. The pancakes arrived, steam rising from the chocolate-studded stack, and Emily's eyes lit up with delight. As they shared their celebratory breakfast, John realized that sometimes victory looked different than he'd imagined. Sometimes it wasn't about dramatic courtroom speeches or perfect solutions. Sometimes it was simply about sitting in a worn diner booth with his daughter, watching her arrange her pancakes into a smiley face, and knowing that for now, they were still together. Sunlight streamed through the worn curtains of the Millers' small apartment kitchen. The aroma of butter and maple syrup filled the air as John flipped another pancake on their old electric griddle. Emily sat at their cramped kitchen table, her legs swinging freely beneath her chair, watching the pancakes soar through the air with wide-eyed wonder. "Do the flip again, Daddy," she squealed, clapping her hands. John couldn't help but smile. The morning light caught the floating dust particles, giving their modest kitchen a warm, golden glow. Empty moving boxes still lined the walls. They hadn't fully unpacked since downsizing 3 months ago. But this morning, the clutter didn't seem to matter quite as much. "Coming right up, Princess." John poured more batter onto the griddle. "But you have to eat the ones you've got first." Emily giggled and stabbed her fork into the stack of slightly misshapen pancakes drowning in syrup. "They look like funny faces," she observed, tilting her head. "This one looks like Mrs. Peterson from next door." John chuckled, the sound feeling strange but welcome in his throat. It had been a while since laughter came easily. "Don't let Mrs. Peterson hear you say that." The old landline phone mounted on the wall rang, its sharp bell cutting through their peaceful morning. John wiped his hands on his worn apron and reached for the receiver. "Hello? John? It's Pastor Green." The familiar warm voice brought immediate comfort. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, sir. Just making breakfast with Emily." "Good, good." There was a pause. "Listen, John. I heard about what happened at the courthouse yesterday. The congregation's been praying for you both." John's throat tightened. "Thank you, Pastor. That means a lot." "There's something else," Pastor Green continued. "You know that old fellowship hall we've been meaning to fix up? The roof needs work, and there's some painting to be done. I remember you mentioned having construction experience." "Yes, sir. Did some contracting work between deployments." "Well, we've got the budget approved for repairs. I thought of you first. It's honest work, fair pay. What do you say?" John had to steady himself against the counter. That would be incredible, Pastor. Thank you." "Don't thank me, son. The Lord provides. Can you start Monday?" After hanging up, John turned to find Emily watching him, syrup dripping from her chin. "Was that Pastor Green? Is he coming for pancakes too?" "No, sweetie." John returned to the griddle, his movements lighter. "But he just offered Daddy some work at the church. Like fixing things?" "You're good at fixing things, Daddy." "That's right, Princess." Emily beamed, pride radiating from her small face. "Just like you fixed people in the army. That's why you got your special star." John's hands stilled for a moment over the griddle. The memory of yesterday's courtroom scene flooded back, not the humiliation now, but the way his daughter's voice had rung out defending him. The way the entire room had changed when they saw his silver star. "Time to get ready for school," he said, stacking the last pancake on her plate. "Don't want to be late." At the elementary school drop-off, Emily hugged him tighter than usual. "I'm going to tell Miss Thompson about your medal today," she declared. "She asks us to share important things on Fridays." "Emily, you don't have to." "But I want to." She looked up at him with her mother's determined expression. "You're a hero, Daddy. Everyone should know." John watched her skip into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. Other parents nodded at him as they passed, some offering small smiles. Was it his imagination? Or did they look at him differently today? Not with the usual mixture of pity and awkward avoidance, but with something like respect? The day passed in a blur of productivity. John cleaned the apartment, made 3 phone calls about potential part-time work, and even fixed the squeaky cabinet hinge that had been driving them crazy for weeks. The weight that had been crushing his chest for months felt just a little lighter. That evening, after tucking Emily into bed with her favorite story, John sat in the living room's dim light. The street lamp outside cast long shadows across the carpet, and somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed briefly before falling silent. He reached for the silver frame on the side table, the one piece of decor he'd made sure to unpack right away. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time at their wedding. Her eyes sparkled with the same determination he now saw in Emily's face every day. "You should have seen her yesterday," he whispered to the photograph, his voice barely audible. "Standing up for her old man like that. She's got your spirit, Sarah, your strength." He traced the edge of the frame with his finger, remembering how Sarah had always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. The way she'd stuck by him through the nightmares after his return. How she'd never once complained about the modest life his veteran's pension provided. "I was so scared of losing her," he confided to the silent photograph. "Still am. But today, He glanced toward Emily's room, where her nightlight cast a gentle glow under the door. "Today felt different," Pastor Green called. "The church needs work done." People looked at me like they used to. Before everything, a car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the walls. In that brief illumination, Sarah's smile seemed to grow warmer, more encouraging. "Maybe we're going to be all right," John whispered, holding the frame close to his chest. "Maybe we're finally going to be all right." The polished mahogany desk shuddered as Richard Hawthorne slammed his leather briefcase down. His corner office on the 20th floor of downtown's most prestigious law building usually brought him comfort, but not today. The morning sun cast long shadows across his face as he glowered at the Silver Star citation printed on his computer screen. "Unacceptable," he muttered, running his manicured fingers through his silver hair. His assistant, Sarah, stood quietly in the doorway, notepad in hand. "I will not be made a fool of in my own courtroom." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hawthorne, perhaps we should." "What?" he snapped, swiveling in his chair to face her. "Let some broke veteran with PTSD raise a child alone. That medal doesn't make him a fit father." He stood up and paced behind his desk, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The city sprawled out below his window, a concrete maze where he usually felt like king. But today, that single moment in court, when that little girl had spoken up and that medal had appeared, had cracked his perfect record. "Pull everything you can find on John Miller," he ordered, turning back to Sarah. "Military records, medical history, financial statements. I want to know about every job he's lost, every bill he's missed, every moment he's shown signs of instability." Sarah's pen moved across her notepad. "His military records might be classified." "Then find someone who can unclassify them," Hawthorne interrupted. "Call in favors. I don't care what it costs. That man has demons, and I'm going to drag them into the light." He pulled up John's preliminary file on his computer. "Look here. Irregular employment history. Worked as a security guard but quit after 3 months. Construction job lasted barely 6 weeks. Pattern of instability." His finger jabbed at the screen. "And his mortgage, 3 months behind at one point. Had to get help from his church to catch up." Sarah's pen hesitated. "Sir, considering what he's been through..." "What he's been through is exactly what makes him dangerous," Hawthorne cut in. "Combat veterans with PTSD raising children alone? It's a disaster waiting to happen." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "Get me Dr. Matthews. He's testified as our expert witness before. We'll need a psychological evaluation that highlights the risks." The morning light caught the awards lining Hawthorne's wall, testament to decades of legal victories. He wasn't about to let some sympathetic story about a war hero derail his reputation. "And Sarah?" he added as she turned to leave. "Find out about the wife's death. Every detail. There might be something there we can use." Across town, in a modest apartment complex, John Miller sat on the edge of his daughter's small bed, a worn storybook in his hands. Emily's room was simple but filled with love. Crayon drawings covered one wall, and a small stuffed bear sat guard on her pillow. "Once upon a time," John began, his voice soft and warm, "there was a little knight who was afraid of dragons." Emily snuggled deeper under her pink comforter. "Like you were afraid of the fireworks, Daddy?" John's breath caught for a moment, but he smiled gently. "Something like that, sweetheart. But you know what? The little knight learned that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. Like you do," Emily said with absolute conviction. John smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "The little knight had something very special that helped him be brave. Do you know what it was?" Emily's eyes sparkled in the soft glow of her nightlight. "Was it love?" "That's right," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "He had people who loved him and believed in him, just like I have you." He continued reading, his voice painting pictures of a knight who faced his fears one small step at a time, until Emily's eyes began to droop. As her breathing deepened into sleep, John carefully closed the book and placed it on her nightstand. For a moment he just sat there, watching his daughter sleep. She looked so much like her mother. The same gentle curve of her cheek, the same peaceful expression in sleep. His hand unconsciously went to his pocket, where he always kept the small box containing his silver star. The medal had saved them today, but John knew better than to think their troubles were over. He'd seen enough battles to know that the first skirmish was rarely the last. But looking at Emily's peaceful face, he made a silent promise, the same promise he'd made on countless nights in far-off deserts and mountains. He would protect her, no matter what it took. Standing quietly, John adjusted Emily's blanket one last time and moved to the doorway. He paused there, framed in the soft light from the hallway. "Good night, my brave girl," he whispered. Meanwhile, in his office, Hawthorne was still working as darkness fell over the city. His desk was now covered with papers, preliminary reports, background checks, financial records. His computer screen glowed with military service dates and deployment locations. In his mind, he was already crafting his argument, building his case piece by piece. Sarah appeared in his doorway one final time. "Sir, I've scheduled the meetings you requested. Dr. Matthews can see us tomorrow morning, and I've located 3 of Mr. Miller's former commanding officers." Hawthorne didn't look up from his papers. "Good. Very good. We'll start with the psychological angle. That always plays well with the judge. Then we'll dig deeper into his service record." He shuffled through some documents. "Get me everything you can find about his wife's death, too. There has to be something there we can use." Sarah nodded and disappeared, leaving Hawthorne alone with his plans. He reached for his coffee, now cold and bitter, but he hardly noticed. His mind was focused on one thing: winning. He'd built his career on never backing down, never showing mercy, and he wasn't about to start now. The city lights twinkled below his window, and somewhere out there, a father was telling his daughter bedtime stories about bravery. But in this tower of glass and steel, a different kind of battle was being planned. One fought with papers and procedures, testimonies and technicalities. Hawthorne smiled grimly as he added another note to his growing file. The real fight was just beginning. The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mark's Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. John Miller worked methodically, his calloused hands moving with practiced precision as he tightened loose screws and reinforced wobbly joints. The familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. A few feet away, Emily sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor, her crayons scattered around her like fallen autumn leaves. Her small tongue poked out in concentration as she worked on what appeared to be a masterpiece, complete with stick figures and plenty of hearts. "Daddy, look!" Emily held up her drawing. "It's us at the park." John paused his work, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that ice cream we're eating?" "Yep, triple chocolate with sprinkles," she beamed, adding more colorful dots to the drawing. "And see, I drew your medal too." The mention of his silver star made John's chest tighten, but he forced a smile. "Very detailed, Em." The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and Pastor Green's familiar figure emerged from the shadows. His weathered face carried its usual warm expression, though John noticed a hint of concern in his eyes. "The pews are looking much better, John," the pastor said, running his hand along the freshly polished wood. "You have quite the talent for restoration." "Thank you, sir. It's peaceful work." John reached for another screw, but Pastor Green's hand on his shoulder made him pause. "Could we talk for a moment?" The pastor's voice was gentle but serious. "Emily, would you mind if I borrowed your father for just a few minutes?" Emily shook her head, already engrossed in a new drawing. "That's okay. I'm making something for Miss Thompson anyway." The two men walked toward the altar, their footsteps echoing in the empty church. Pastor Green's usual easy manner seemed strained, and John felt his stomach knot with anticipation. "I heard from Judge Lawson this morning," the pastor began, keeping his voice low. "That lawyer, Hawthorne, he's been asking questions around town, digging into your service record, your medical history." John's hands clenched involuntarily. "I figured he might. He's building a case, son, trying to paint a picture of instability." Pastor Green's eyes were kind but worried. "The judge wanted me to tell you she's arranged some resources, parenting classes at the community center, counseling sessions at the VA. She can't appear to be helping directly, but she feels guilty," John finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "She feels responsible for doing what's right," the pastor corrected. "And right now, that means giving you every chance to prove yourself as a father." John glanced back at Emily, who was now humming softly as she colored. "I never wanted to fight anyone. I just want to take care of my little girl." "I know, John. But sometimes the battles worth fighting find us, whether we want them or not." Pastor Green squeezed his shoulder. "The congregation is behind you. We're not going to let you face this alone." They discussed the details, scheduling, transportation arrangements for Emily while John attended the classes, church members who had offered to help. Through it all, John felt a strange mix of gratitude and shame, pride and humility. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the church windows, John packed up his tools while Emily gathered her art supplies. The drive home was quiet, filled with Emily's soft singing along to the radio and the steady hum of their old truck's engine. Their small apartment welcomed them with its familiar comfort. Pictures of happier times on the walls, Emily's artwork decorating the refrigerator, the slight draft from the window they could never quite seal properly. While John heated up leftover casserole from a church member, Emily pulled out her homework folder. "Miss Thompson said we had to write about our hero," she announced, proudly holding up several sheets of lined paper covered in her careful handwriting. "Can I read it to you?" John's throat tightened as he nodded, settling into his worn armchair. Emily cleared her throat dramatically and began to read. "My Daddy is My Hero," by Emily Miller. "Some people think heroes wear capes or fly in the sky, but my hero wears an old jacket and drives a blue truck. My daddy is my hero because he saves me every day. He saves me from being scared at night by checking for monsters under my bed. He saves me from being hungry by always making sure I have lunch for school, even when I know money is tight. Daddy has a special medal called a Silver Star because he saved people in the war. But that's not why he's my hero. He's my hero because he reads me stories even when he's tired. He's my hero because he never forgets to braid my hair the way Mommy used to do it. He's my hero because even when people are mean to him, he stays kind. Sometimes Daddy gets sad or scared, especially when there are loud noises. But that doesn't make him less of a hero. My teacher says being brave means doing something even when you're scared. And Daddy is the bravest person I know. I know some people think Daddy isn't good enough to take care of me. But they're wrong. He's the best daddy in the whole world. And I'm proud that he's my hero." John sat frozen in his chair, tears streaming down his face. Each word of Emily's essay hit him like a physical force, breaking down walls he'd built around his heart. He saw himself through her eyes, not as a broken man struggling to keep it together, but as someone worthy of love and admiration. Emily lowered the paper, watching him with concerned eyes. "Daddy, are you okay? Did you not like it?" In response, John opened his arms, and Emily rushed into them, her small frame fitting perfectly against his chest like she had done since she was a baby. He held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I loved it, sweetheart," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." As he held his daughter, John felt something shift inside him. The fear that had been his constant companion since the court case began transformed into something else: determination. Looking at Emily's essay, at her pure, unquestioning love, he knew he couldn't let anyone take this away from them. He might not have money or power or influence, but he had something more important: a daughter who believed in him, a community that supported him, and now, finally, the strength to fight for what mattered most. The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., and John Miller's eyes snapped open, a habit from his military days that hadn't faded. He lay there for a moment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling of his small bedroom. The weight of another demanding day pressed down on his chest, but he pushed it aside and swung his feet onto the cold floor. In the cramped bathroom, he studied his reflection. Dark circles under his eyes, a few more gray hairs at his temples. The therapy sessions were helping, but they drained him emotionally. Still, he had to keep going. For Emily. The coffee maker gurgled to life as John packed Emily's lunch, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and the last granola bar from the box. Their kitchen cupboards were getting bare again, but payday wasn't until next week. He checked his worn leather wallet, just enough for milk and bread to get them through. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," he called softly, entering Emily's room. She was already awake, hugging her stuffed elephant and smiling up at him. "Morning, Daddy." She bounced out of bed, her energy infectious. "Can I wear my blue dress today? The one Mrs. Carter fixed?" John nodded, remembering how their elderly neighbor had skillfully mended the torn hem last week. "Sure can, sunshine." While Emily got dressed, John heard a gentle knock at the front door. Opening it, he found Mrs. Carter holding a covered casserole dish. "Don't you dare say no," she said firmly, pushing past him into the kitchen. Her silver hair was perfectly set, as always. "I made too much chicken pot pie yesterday. Emily mentioned it's your favorite." John's throat tightened. They both knew she hadn't made too much. She'd made it specifically for them. "Mrs. Carter, you don't have to." "Hush now." She set the dish down and turned to face him, her kind eyes stern. "That's what neighbors are for. Besides, I need someone to taste test my cooking. Can't trust my own taste buds anymore at my age." Emily appeared then, twirling in her blue dress. "Mrs. Carter!" She hugged the older woman's legs. "Are you staying with me today?" "That's right, dear. Your daddy has his important appointment, and then work at the hardware store." She winked at John. "We'll have a wonderful time." John checked his watch. He had 45 minutes to get Emily to school before his therapy session, then a shift at Richardson's Hardware, followed by afternoon maintenance work at the church. "Breakfast first," Mrs. Carter announced, pulling eggs from her oversized purse. "Sit down, both of you. I'm not taking no for an answer." As she bustled around their small kitchen, John felt overwhelmed by her kindness. She'd been a godsend since Sarah passed away, stepping in as a surrogate grandmother to Emily. The smell of scrambled eggs and toast filled the apartment. Through the thin walls, John could hear their upstairs neighbor getting ready for work, the familiar creaks and footsteps oddly comforting in their routine. "The church ladies are organizing a clothing drive, Mrs. Carter mentioned casually as they ate. "Lots of good stuff in Emily's size. And some men's clothes too, John. Professional wear." He started to protest, but she raised a hand. "Before you say anything, remember what Pastor Mike said about pride versus wisdom." John nodded slowly, remembering Sunday's sermon about accepting help when needed. The church community had rallied around them, offering support without making him feel like a charity case. Last week, someone had anonymously paid for Emily's school supplies. The day before, a grocery gift card had appeared in their mailbox. After breakfast, John drove Emily to school in their aging sedan, praying the check engine light wouldn't come on again. At drop-off, Emily hugged him extra tight. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. "You're doing great." Those simple words nearly undid him. He watched her skip into the building, her backpack bouncing, before heading to his therapy session. Dr. Matthews' office was small but welcoming. They spent an hour working through John's PTSD triggers, developing coping strategies for when the memories became too intense. It was exhausting but necessary work. "You're making progress, John," Dr. Matthews said as their session ended. "How are the nightmares?" "Better," he admitted. "The breathing exercises help." He didn't mention that he still sometimes woke up in cold sweats, the sound of explosions echoing in his mind. The hardware store shift went by quickly. Mr. Richardson, understanding John's situation, had created a flexible schedule that worked around his other commitments. The physical work of stocking shelves and helping customers felt good, grounding. During his lunch break, he found a text from Mrs. Carter with a photo of Emily helping her bake cookies. The sight of his daughter's flour-covered face and bright smile gave him renewed energy for the afternoon. At the church, Pastor Mike met him with a warm handshake. "John, before you start on those repairs, the deacons wanted me to give you this." He handed over an envelope. "It's not much, but it's what we can do to help with Emily's winter clothes." John's eyes burned as he accepted the envelope. "I don't know how to thank everyone." "You already have," Pastor Mike replied simply. "By letting us help. That's what family does." The day's work finally done, John returned home to find Emily and Mrs. Carter playing cards at the kitchen table. The apartment smelled of fresh-baked cookies and love. After Mrs. Carter left, insisting they keep the leftover cookies, John tucked Emily into bed. He read her favorite story, kissed her goodnight, and quietly closed her door. In the living room, he pulled out a notebook he'd started keeping. Under the dim lamplight, he wrote slowly, purposefully, "I will fight for her, no matter what." The words were a promise, a prayer, and a declaration of determination all at once. Judge Rebecca Lawson stood at the entrance of the Veterans Community Center, smoothing down her casual blazer. It felt strange being here without her court robes, but the annual Veterans Support Fair was close to her heart. The familiar scent of coffee and donuts wafted through the air as volunteers set up folding tables and hung red, white, and blue bunting. "Judge Lawson," called out Marcus, the center's director, "thank you for coming. We've got a great turnout of volunteers today." She nodded, clutching her brother's dog tags in her pocket. a habit she'd developed since his passing. The large gymnasium was already bustling with activity. Elderly veterans in wheelchairs were being helped to various stations where they could access medical resources, benefits assistance, and other services. That's when she spotted him. John Miller was kneeling beside an older veteran in a worn army jacket, carefully adjusting the man's oxygen tank. She wouldn't have recognized him if it weren't for little Emily, who sat cross-legged nearby, showing her drawings to another veteran. "I didn't know Mr. Miller volunteered here," Rebecca said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Oh yeah, John's been coming every Saturday for months now. Won't take a dime for his help either, even though God knows he could use it." Rebecca watched as John listened intently to the elderly veteran's story, nodding with understanding. There was no trace of the nervous, stammering man from her courtroom. Here, among his fellow servicemen, his shoulders were relaxed, his movements sure and gentle. Emily bounced over to her father, holding up a crayon drawing. "Look, Daddy, Mr. George helped me draw his old plane." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," John said, his face lighting up. He turned to the veteran he was helping. "Sir, have you met my daughter? She's quite the artist." The old man's eyes crinkled. "Well, let me see that masterpiece, young lady." Rebecca found herself moving closer, pretending to inspect the resource tables. John noticed her presence and stiffened slightly, but maintained his composure. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said quietly. "Please, it's Rebecca here," she replied, surprising herself with the informality. "That's a lovely drawing, Emily." Emily beamed. "Thank you. Do you want to see the others? I drew one for every veteran here today." "Emily," John said gently, "I'm sure the judge is very busy with the event," but Rebecca found herself pulling up a chair. "I'd love to see them, Emily." She watched as the little girl carefully showed her each drawing, explaining the stories behind them. John remained nearby, helping other veterans while keeping a protective eye on his daughter. Through the morning, Rebecca observed how John anticipated needs before they were voiced, adjusting wheelchair footrests, fetching water, listening patiently to war stories. He never drew attention to himself, never mentioned his own service. When Emily got sleepy, he created a little nest for her with his jacket in a quiet corner, where she could nap safely in his line of sight. During a quiet moment, Rebecca found herself standing next to John at the coffee station. "You're good with them," she said, nodding toward the veterans. "They trust you." John poured a cup of coffee and offered it to her first. "They're family," he said simply. "We understand each other. And Emily seems to flourish here." A shadow crossed his face. "I know it's not an ideal environment for a child, but I can't afford a sitter on Saturdays, and—" He trailed off, worried he'd said too much. "John," Rebecca said, surprising them both with her gentleness, "I see a little girl who's learning compassion, service, and love from her father's example. That's worth more than any fancy daycare." His eyes met hers briefly, filled with grateful understanding, before he was called away to help with lunch preparations. Later that evening, Rebecca sat in her home office, where her brother's military photo held pride of place on her desk. She picked it up, running her fingers over the frame. "You'd like him, Tommy," she whispered. "He's the real deal." The same qualities she'd admired in her brother, quiet strength, selfless service, deep love for family, she'd seen today in John Miller. The contrast between the confident, capable man at the Veterans Center and the struggling father in her courtroom troubled her. Setting down the photo, she opened John's case file. The opposing lawyer's accusations about John's PTSD and financial instability seemed hollow now, lacking the context of the whole man she'd observed today. She thought of how tenderly he'd cared for both the elderly veterans and his daughter, how he'd maintained his dignity despite his obvious poverty. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, the weight of her earlier harsh judgment sitting heavy on her shoulders. The man she'd laughed at in court was the same man who spent his Saturdays serving others while fighting his own battles. She picked up her brother's photo again, remembering how Tommy had struggled after his first tour, how the system had failed him before his final deployment. "I was wrong, Tommy," she whispered to the photo. "I was so wrong about him." Through her window, she could see the sun setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The same sun would be setting over John and Emily's small apartment, where a devoted father would be making dinner for his daughter, helping with homework, carrying on despite the odds stacked against them. Rebecca placed Tommy's photo back on her desk, positioning it so his smile faced her chair. A reminder to look deeper, to see beyond the surface of those who came before her bench. John Miller wasn't just another case file. He was a father, a veteran, a man doing his best to keep his small family together while still finding ways to serve others. The revelation sat with her as night fell, challenging her to question how many other stories she might have missed behind the sterile facts of legal briefs and court procedures. John Miller tugged at his frayed shirt collar, standing in the bustling elementary school hallway. The patched-up suit he wore felt tight across his shoulders, and a small tear near the elbow had been carefully mended with dark thread. Around him, other parents chatted in their crisp business attire and designer clothes. "You made it!" Emily's voice rang out above the crowd. She burst through a classroom door, her Navy school uniform slightly rumpled and her ponytail bouncing with each step. Her bright smile washed away John's anxiety like sunshine after rain. "Wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart." He crouched down to her level, straightening her collar. The familiar smell of crayons and apple juice clung to her, reminding him of simpler times. "Come on, Daddy, we're about to start." Emily grabbed his hand, practically dragging him into Mrs. Thompson's third-grade classroom. Colorful artwork decorated the walls, and tiny chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing the front. John squeezed into one of the small chairs, his knees nearly touching his chest. A few parents chuckled good-naturedly, and he managed a small smile. Emily bounced on her toes near the teacher's desk, clutching a piece of paper to her chest. Mrs. Thompson, a warm-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, called the class to order. "Welcome, parents, to our annual Parents' Day presentations. Each student has written an essay about someone they admire, and they'll be sharing these with us today." Several students went before Emily, reading about astronauts, doctors, and movie stars. John watched his daughter fidget with excitement, her paper now slightly crumpled from her tight grip. When Mrs. Thompson called her name, Emily practically skipped to the front of the room. She smoothed out her paper and took a deep breath. "My essay is called, 'My Daddy is My Hero.'" Her clear voice filled the classroom, and John's heart squeezed in his chest. "Some people think heroes wear capes or fight bad guys in movies," Emily read. "But my daddy is a real hero. He fought in a war far away to protect people he didn't even know. He has a special star medal that proves it. But that's not why he's my hero." John sat very still, aware of other parents turning to look at him. Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "My daddy is my hero because he makes me pancakes even when he's really tired. He helps me with my math homework and never gets mad when I don't understand right away. He works lots of different jobs to take care of us, and he still finds time to read me bedtime stories." A tissue box quietly made its way around the room. John blinked rapidly, trying to keep his composure. "Sometimes I hear him crying at night when he thinks I'm asleep. I know he misses Mommy, and so do I. But he always has a smile for me in the morning. That's what real heroes do. They keep going, even when things are hard." Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Other parents leaned forward, completely captivated by Emily's words. "My daddy taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. He says that helping others is more important than having fancy things. He shows me every day what love looks like." Emily looked directly at John now, her eyes shining. "Some kids have daddies who buy them lots of toys or take them to Disney World. My daddy gives me something better. He gives me all of his heart. That's why my daddy is my hero, and I wouldn't trade him for anyone else in the whole world." The classroom erupted in applause. John couldn't hold back his tears anymore, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of shame or worry. Pride swelled in his chest, threatening to burst it wide open. Emily ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He lifted her onto his lap, not caring that his suit might wrinkle or that other parents were watching. "That was beautiful, Emmy," he whispered into her hair. Parents and teachers gathered around them, offering kind words and warm smiles. Mrs. Thompson squeezed John's shoulder. "You've raised a remarkable young lady, Mr. Miller. Her essay will be featured in our school newsletter." As the crowd began to disperse, Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Can we walk home today, Daddy? It's really nice outside." They stepped out into the autumn afternoon, leaves crunching under their feet. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Emily skipped beside him, her backpack bouncing with each step. She slipped her small hand into his, looking up with those earnest eyes that could melt his heart in an instant. "See, Daddy? Everyone knows you're the best." The evening sun cast long shadows through John Miller's apartment window as he fumbled with his borrowed bow tie. In his bedroom mirror, A different man seemed to stare back at him. Gone was the worn jacket and patched pants. Instead, he wore a perfectly fitted black suit, courtesy of his church community's generosity. "Need some help there?" Mrs. Carter called from the living room where she was helping Emily get ready. "My Harold used to struggle with those things too." John smiled, remembering how the elderly neighbor had insisted on contributing to the suit rental. "I think I've got it, ma'am. Just need to." His fingers finally cooperated, and the bow tie settled into place. Emily bounced into his room, wearing a pale blue dress that the church ladies had altered just for her. Her hair was neatly braided with a matching ribbon.
"Daddy, you look like a movie star."
"And you look like a princess, sweetheart." John's voice caught in his throat. The invitation to the Veterans Honor Gala had arrived unexpectedly last week, and the community's response had overwhelmed him. Pastor Dave had organized the suit rental, the church women had handled Emily's outfit, and even his therapy group had pitched in for the tickets. Mrs. Carter appeared in the doorway, her eyes misty. "Now don't you two make me cry before you even get there." She adjusted Emily's ribbon one last time. "The car should be here any minute." Right on cue, a horn honked outside. Pastor Dave had arranged for a local limo service to donate their services for the evening. Emily rushed to the window, gasping at the sight of the sleek black car. "Look, Daddy, it's just like Cinderella." The drive to the hotel downtown felt surreal. Emily pressed her nose against the window, pointing out every lit-up building they passed. John sat quietly, his Silver Star medal pinned carefully to his lapel. He hadn't worn it since that day in court, but tonight felt right. The hotel ballroom took John's breath away. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and round tables draped in white lined the polished dance floor. A small stage stood at the front, decorated with American flags and flowers. Other veterans in their finest attire mingled with community leaders and supporters. "Miller, over here!" a familiar voice called out. It was Steve from his therapy group, waving them toward a table near the front. Emily skipped ahead, already chatting with Steve's daughter about their dresses. As they settled in, John noticed Judge Rebecca Lawson sitting quietly at a corner table. She wore an elegant navy dress, and her usual stern expression had softened into something more contemplative. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod. The evening progressed with speeches and dinner. Emily charmed everyone at their table, proudly telling anyone who would listen about her daddy's medal. John felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee they'd serve with dessert. Then came the moment that changed everything. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, holding a small crystal award. "Tonight, we'd like to recognize a special veteran among us. A man who not only served his country with distinction, earning the Silver Star for valor in combat, but who continues to serve his community and, most importantly, shows us daily what it means to be a father." John's heart stopped as he heard his name called. Emily squeezed his hand tight, her face glowing with pride. "Go on, Daddy." His legs felt wooden as he made his way to the stage. The applause wrapped around him like a warm blanket, but it was Emily's beaming face in the front row that gave him strength. As he accepted the award, he caught sight of Judge Lawson again. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as she clapped, perhaps seeing her own brother in him for a moment. "I'm not much for speeches," John said into the microphone, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I want to thank my daughter Emily. She's the real hero in my life. She gives me the courage to keep going every day." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And I want to thank this community. You've shown me that no veteran has to stand alone." The applause that followed felt different this time, not just polite, but genuine and warm. As John returned to his seat, several people reached out to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. Emily launched herself into his arms the moment he sat down. Later, as the band played soft music, Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we dance? Like in the movies?" John led her to the dance floor, where other fathers and daughters were already swaying to the music. Emily stood on his shoes, giggling as he guided them in slow circles under the twinkling chandeliers. Her small hands gripped his, and her eyes shone with pure joy. "Are you happy, Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him with those innocent eyes that saw straight to his soul. John swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Yes, sweetheart. Very happy." They continued their dance, lost in their own world of twirling lights and gentle music. The crystal award caught the light from its place on their table, but the real treasure was right here in his arms. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt like a promise. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window of John Miller's modest apartment, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The events of last night's gala still brought a smile to his face as he whisked eggs in a bowl. His Silver Star medal, which he'd worn proudly at the event, now sat in its familiar wooden box on the kitchen counter. "Emily, breakfast in 5 minutes, sweetheart," he called down the hallway. The sound of cartoons from the living room mixed with his daughter's giggling. John hummed softly as he poured the eggs into the sizzling pan. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt truly hopeful. The gala had been more than just an evening of recognition. It felt like a turning point. People had shaken his hand, looked him in the eye with respect. The judge had even been there, smiling warmly when Emily had dragged him onto the dance floor. Emily padded into the kitchen in her favorite pajamas, the ones with little stars all over them. "Can I have extra cheese on my eggs, Daddy?" "Extra cheese coming right up, Princess." John reached for the cheese when 3 sharp knocks on the front door made him freeze. Emily looked up from setting her place at the table. "Who's that?" "Probably Mrs. Carter returning your hairband from last night," John said, though something in his gut told him otherwise. He turned off the stove and wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Stay here, okay?" The knocking came again, more insistent this time. John's combat-trained instincts kicked in, noting the authoritative rhythm of the knocks. He opened the door to find a young woman in a crisp blazer holding a leather portfolio, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Mr. Miller?" The woman's voice was professional but held a note of sympathy. "I'm Angela Morales from Child Protective Services. May we come in?" John's throat went dry. His fingers gripped the doorframe harder. What is this about?" "Sir, we have some papers we need to discuss with you." She glanced past him into the apartment. "Is Emily here?" The mention of his daughter's name snapped John to attention. "She's eating breakfast. Please, whatever this is about." "Daddy?" Emily's small voice came from behind him. "The eggs are getting cold." Miss Morales smiled gently at Emily before turning back to John. "Mr. Miller, we have an emergency custody order here." She pulled out official-looking documents from her portfolio. "There's been some concerning evidence submitted to the court regarding." John's world started spinning as he scanned the papers. Words jumped out at him. Psychological evaluation, PTSD, incident, temporary removal, foster care placement. His hand shook as he reached the part about the fireworks show. It had been July 4th, months ago. The unexpected explosions had triggered something in him. A flashback. He dropped to the ground, covering his head. Emily had been scared, not by him, but for him. A neighbor had called 911, but by the time they arrived, he'd already calmed down. Emily had held his hand the whole time, telling him it was okay. "This is ridiculous," John's voice cracked. "That was one incident. I've been in therapy. I'm doing everything right." "Mr. Miller," Miss Morales interrupted gently, "the court takes these matters very seriously. The opposing counsel has presented evidence suggesting—" "Evidence?" John's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "You mean they twisted one moment of—" He stopped, aware of Emily watching from the kitchen doorway. "Daddy!" Emily's voice trembled. "What's wrong?" Miss Morales knelt down to Emily's level. "Hi, Emily. I'm Angela. You're going to come stay with a very nice family for a little while." "No!" Emily ran to John, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I want to stay with Daddy." John's heart shattered as he felt his daughter's tears soaking through his shirt. He crouched down, holding her close, trying to keep his own voice steady. "Emily, sweetheart, look at me." Her tear-stained face turned up to his, and John had to summon every ounce of strength not to break down himself. Sometimes, grown-ups need to sort things out. But I promise you, I'm going to fix this. "The foster family has been thoroughly vetted," Miss Morales said softly. "They live nearby, and they understand this is temporary while the court reviews the case." Emily's grip tightened on John's shirt. "But what about my school? What about Mrs. Carter? What about—" "You'll still go to your same school," Miss Morales assured her. "And this is just temporary, while we make sure everything is okay at home." John felt numb as Miss Morales explained the next steps. Emily would need to pack a bag. They would arrange supervised visits. The court would review the case as soon as possible. Can she at least finish her breakfast?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. Miss Morales nodded sympathetically. "Of course, We'll give you a few minutes to pack some things. John led Emily back to the kitchen, where the now cold eggs sat forgotten. He tried to encourage her to eat, but she just sat there, tears silently rolling down her cheeks as she watched him pack her backpack with shaking hands. Her favorite pajamas, her stuffed elephant, her school books. The Foster family has kids too, Miss Morales offered, trying to sound encouraging. They have a daughter just about your age, Emily. But Emily wasn't listening. She clung to John's leg, her small fingers digging into his pants. Please don't let them take me, Daddy. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Those words broke something in John. He dropped to his knees, pulling Emily into a fierce hug. Listen to me, Emily Miller. You are good. You are perfect. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. He felt her small body shaking with sobs as the words temporary foster care echoed in his head like a death sentence. Everything they'd built, all the progress they'd made, it was crumbling around them in the morning sunshine that now seemed cruel in its cheerfulness. Miss Morales cleared her throat softly. Mr. Miller, it's time. The courthouse felt colder today. John stood rigid at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, a soldier's stance that had become his shield when the world crashed around him. The morning light filtered through the high windows, but it brought no warmth to the proceedings. Your Honor. The opposing lawyer's voice rang out with theatrical flair, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as he paced. I present to you evidence that proves beyond any doubt the unstable nature of Mr. Miller's household. He held up a thick manila folder like it contained state secrets. John's throat tightened. He knew what was in that folder. Last July 4th, during the community fireworks display, the lawyer continued, his voice rising for effect, Mr. Miller experienced what witnesses describe as a severe episode of post-traumatic stress disorder. He pulled out statements, waving them like battle flags. According to multiple accounts, he dropped to the ground, covering his head, shouting military commands that terrified nearby families. The memory stabbed through John. The sounds, the lights, the smell of gunpowder. It had all been too much. He tried so hard to stay strong for Emily, but Emily Miller, his 8-year-old daughter, was present during this incident. The lawyer's words cut deeper. She was found crying, trying to shake her father awake while he was lost in his flashback. Is this the environment we want for a child? John wanted to explain, to tell them how Emily had been safe, how he'd never hurt her, how she'd understood better than anyone. But the words wouldn't come. His hands trembled behind his back. Furthermore, the lawyer pressed on. Mr. Miller has failed to seek consistent professional help for his condition. His sporadic attendance at therapy sessions, which only began after our initial hearing, shows a pattern of negligence toward his own mental health. The judge sat stone-faced, her earlier warmth replaced by professional detachment. She glanced at John, and he saw conflict in her eyes. The battle between duty and compassion. Your Honor, John finally managed, his voice rough. I would never. Emily is everything to me. That night, yes, I struggled, but I've been working hard. The therapy, the parenting classes. Exactly, the lawyer interrupted. Working hard now when it's too late. After endangering his child. After objection. The court, appointed defender beside John, spoke up, but his voice lacked conviction. Emily sat in the back row with Angela, the foster care worker, her small face pale and frightened. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one she'd picked special for court, and clutched her worn teddy bear like a lifeline. Daddy? Her voice quivered across the courtroom. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! She removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with resignation. Given the evidence presented, and in accordance with child protection protocols, I have no choice but to order temporary removal of Emily Miller into foster care, pending full psychological evaluation and— No! Emily's cry pierced the formal atmosphere. She broke away from Angela's gentle grip and ran toward John.
Please, no! Daddy!
John's heart shattered as Emily crashed into his legs, her small arms wrapping around him with desperate strength. He knelt down, holding her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. It's okay, sweetheart, he whispered, though nothing was okay. It's just for a little while. I promise I'll fix this. I don't want to go, Emily sobbed into his shoulder. You need me, Daddy. Who's gonna make you smile? Who's gonna help you be brave?" The courthouse blurred through John's tears. Angela approached slowly, her face etched with professional sympathy. "Emily, honey," she said softly, "we need to go now. Your dad will be able to visit you." Emily's fingers dug into John's shirt. "No. He gets scared when he's alone. He needs me." The judge watched the scene unfold, her hands gripping her desk until her knuckles turned white. But the law was the law, and even she couldn't change that today. 2 court officers moved forward, their faces uncomfortable but determined. Angela gently took Emily's shoulders. "Come on, sweetie. It's time." "Daddy, please." Emily's screams echoed off the courthouse walls as they pulled her away.
Please don't let them take me, Daddy!
John stood frozen, each of Emily's cries like a bullet to his heart. He watched as they led her through the heavy wooden doors, her tear-streaked face turned back toward him until the last possible moment. The drive home passed in a blur. The apartment door creaked open to silence, no cartoons playing on the old TV, no crayons scattered across the coffee table, no little voice asking what's for dinner. John's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees in Emily's room, surrounded by her stuffed animals and colorful drawings. One piece of paper caught his eye, a crayon drawing stuck to the refrigerator with a butterfly magnet. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Me and Daddy, best friends forever. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. The paper crumpled slightly in his grip as he held it to his chest. And finally, in the crushing silence of an empty home, John Miller broke down completely. The darkness of the room seemed to close in around him, swallowing his hunched form as he clutched the last piece of his daughter's presence. The morning sun crept through dusty blinds, casting long shadows across John Miller's empty apartment. Dirty dishes filled the sink, 3 days' worth, maybe 4. He'd lost count. Time had become a foggy mess since they took Emily away. John sat in his worn armchair, his gaze fixed on Emily's vacant seat at the kitchen table. Her half-finished math worksheet still lay there, pencil marks frozen mid-equation. He couldn't bring himself to move it. The bright yellow flower-shaped placemat she'd picked out remained untouched, like a museum piece, preserving the last moments before everything fell apart. His fingers absently traced the rough stubble on his chin. The mirror showed a stranger these days, hollow-eyed, unshaven, shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. The proud soldier who'd once carried wounded comrades to safety now couldn't even protect his own daughter. The refrigerator hummed in the silence, almost mockingly. Inside, Mrs. Carter's lasagna sat untouched, along with other meals from concerned church members. The thought of eating made his stomach turn. Food had lost its taste the moment Emily's seat became empty. Rising unsteadily, John grabbed his keys. He hadn't left the apartment in days, except for mandatory counseling sessions. But today, he needed to talk to someone who'd always listened, without judgment. The drive to Mountain View Cemetery was automatic, muscle memory guiding him through familiar turns. The late autumn wind scattered leaves across the perfectly maintained grounds as he walked the path he knew by heart. Sarah's headstone stood under an old oak tree, simple and elegant, just like she'd been in life. John's knees sank into the damp grass. His fingers traced the engraved letters of his wife's name, feeling the cold stone beneath his touch. "I failed her, Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I failed both of you." The wind rustled the oak leaves overhead, nature's quiet response to his pain. "Remember how scared we were when Emily was born?" He smiled sadly, remembering Sarah's fierce determination in those early days. "You knew exactly what to do. But me? I was terrified of breaking her. Now look, I've managed to do exactly that." Tears fell freely now, dotting the grass beneath him. "They're right about me, Sarah. I'm broken. That day with the fireworks. I should have been stronger. Should have held it together." Emily saw her daddy fall apart, and now his words dissolved into quiet sobs. John pulled out Emily's last drawing from his jacket pocket, a crayon masterpiece of their little family, created just days before everything crumbled. The paper had become worn from constant folding and unfolding, but Emily's bright colors remained vibrant. She deserves better than a father who jumps at loud noises, better than someone who can barely keep food on the table. His fingers trembled as he smoothed the drawing against his knee. Maybe they're right to take her away. The afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cemetery grounds. John sat in silence, one hand still resting on Sarah's headstone, feeling more lost than he'd ever been in combat. A gentle voice broke through his thoughts. "Mr. Miller?" He turned to find Angela Morales, Emily's foster care worker, standing a respectful distance away. Her expression held professional sympathy, but there was something else in her eyes. Understanding, perhaps. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly. "I was visiting another family nearby and saw your car." John quickly wiped his eyes with his sleeve, struggling to his feet. "Is Emily okay?" Angela nodded, reaching into her bag. "She Island. Actually, I have something for you." She withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Emily made this yesterday. She was very insistent that I find a way to get it to you." With trembling hands, John unfolded the paper. Fresh tears welled up as he saw the familiar crayon strokes, a drawing of him and Emily holding hands, standing beneath a rainbow. Above them, in Emily's careful 8-year-old printing, were the words that pierced straight through his despair. "Daddy, don't give up." His breath caught in his throat. Even now, separated by court orders and foster care regulations, his little girl was trying to be strong for him, just like her mother would have done. Angela watched him with gentle eyes. "She talks about you constantly, Mr. Miller. Every day, she tells anyone who'll listen about her hero daddy." John carefully refolded the drawing, tucking it safely in his jacket pocket next to the other one. His daughter's love, captured in crayon, rested close to his heart. With a final touch to Sarah's headstone, he straightened his shoulders slightly. Emily's message echoed in his mind. Don't give up. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was still something worth fighting for. The autumn wind picked up again, scattering more leaves around them as John and Angela walked silently back toward the cemetery entrance. Behind them, Sarah's headstone stood steady against the darkening sky, a quiet witness to both despair and the first tiny spark of renewed hope. The morning light caught the edges of Emily's crayon drawing as John carefully taped it to the refrigerator. His fingers lingered on the childish strokes, tracing the stick figures of himself and Emily holding hands. The words, "Daddy, don't give up," seemed to pulse with his daughter's voice. The apartment felt hollow without her laughter. Dishes cluttered the sink, and dust had settled on her favorite stuffed bear, still sitting on the couch where she'd left it. John's reflection in the kitchen window showed a man he barely recognized, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped with defeat, but something stirred in his chest as he looked at the drawing again. Emily believed in him. She was counting on him, and he'd never given up in combat. Why should he give up now, in the most important fight of his life? John straightened his shoulders and walked to the bathroom. With trembling hands, he picked up his razor and began to shave, methodically removing the weeks of stubble that had grown during his despair. Each stroke felt like shedding a layer of hopelessness. The phone rang. It was Pastor Green. "John? We missed you at service yesterday." "Pastor, John's voice cracked. "I need help." "Come by the church in an hour," the pastor said warmly. "We'll figure this out together." At the church, Pastor Green had already gathered a small group of supporters. Mrs. Carter from next door was there, along with 2 veterans from the congregation who'd been through similar battles. They sat in the church basement, sharing coffee and determination. "First things first," Pastor Green said, spreading out a calendar. "You've got those therapy sessions scheduled?" John nodded. "Twice a week. Haven't missed one since." He swallowed hard. "Since they took her." "Good. That shows commitment to personal growth." "Mrs." Carter patted his hand. "I've written a character reference letter about all the times I've watched Emily. How responsible you've been, always on time, how happy she Island." One of the veterans, Mike, leaned forward. "We're gathering statements from your old unit, too. Show them that PTSD doesn't define you. It's something you're actively managing." They worked through the afternoon, building a strategy. Pastor Green helped John organize his financial records, showing steady employment through the odd jobs and careful budgeting. Mrs. Carter brought casseroles to stock his freezer, ensuring he'd eat properly. The veterans shared coping techniques for managing stress and anxiety. That evening, John attended his therapy session with renewed focus. Instead of just going through the motions, he engaged fully, discussing his triggers and learning new techniques for handling them. "The fireworks incident," he told his therapist. "I've been avoiding talking about it, but I need to face it. "That's very brave, John," the therapist said, making notes. "Let's work through what happened and develop better coping strategies." Days turned into weeks. John kept Emily's drawing in his wallet now, looking at it whenever he needed strength. He took on extra work at the church, rebuilding the children's playground. The physical labor helped clear his mind, and the sound of kids playing reminded him what he was fighting for. He started documenting everything: therapy sessions, work hours, home improvements. Pastor Green helped him prepare a presentation showing his support system and progress. The community rallied around him, dropping off groceries, offering encouragement, and even helping him clean and organize the apartment for home inspections. One morning, John stood in front of his bedroom mirror, looking at himself in his old uniform jacket. The silver star caught the light, but it wasn't the medal that held his attention. It was the change in his own eyes. The defeat had been replaced by quiet determination. His posture was straight again, shoulders squared, chin up. He touched Emily's drawing in his pocket and whispered, "For her, always for her." The words echoed in the quiet apartment, not as a desperate plea, but as a solemn promise. His reflection showed a father ready to fight, not with weapons, but with love, determination, and the strength of a community standing behind him. Judge Rebecca Lawson sat alone in her dimly lit chambers, the wall clock ticking past midnight. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she spread out the thick manila folder containing John Miller's complete service record. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over pages that told a story she hadn't fully understood until now. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the first document. The military commendation for his Silver Star spelled out what John had never boasted about: how he'd carried 3 wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire, returning again and again despite his own injuries. The official language couldn't hide the raw courage of that day. "Just like Tommy," she whispered, glancing at her brother's photo on the desk. The same quiet strength, the same humble dedication to duty. She picked up a stack of letters from John's fellow soldiers. Their words painted a picture of a man who put others first, who kept his unit's spirits up during the darkest days, who carried extra weight when others faltered. One letter particularly caught her attention. "Miller never asked for recognition. The day he saved us, he was more worried about writing letters to our families than his own wounds. That's who he is, someone who thinks of others first." Rebecca removed her glasses and rubbed her tired eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she reached for another folder, this one containing recent letters from community members. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, wrote about how John always shoveled her walkway in winter, refusing payment. The church pastor detailed John's volunteer work with other veterans, even while struggling to make ends meet. Emily's teacher had submitted a letter too. "Mr. Miller arrives early to help set up school events, despite working multiple jobs. The love between him and Emily lights up every room they enter. She's the best adjusted child in my class, thanks to his devotion." The judge's eyes welled up as she read Emily's award-winning essay. The child's unedited words captured what all the official documents couldn't. "My daddy has scary dreams sometimes because he saw bad things while being a hero, but he still reads me stories and makes me feel safe. He teaches me that being brave means helping others even when you're scared." Rebecca stood up and walked to her office window, looking out at the city lights below. The same streets Tommy had walked before deploying, full of dreams about coming home and starting a family. He never got the chance, but here was John Miller, fighting every day to be the father his daughter needed, despite carrying wounds both visible and hidden. She returned to her desk and opened her worn Bible, finding the passage that had been nagging at her conscience. "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed." The words seemed to glow on the page, speaking directly to her heart. More testimonies filled her desk, the therapist's report showing John's commitment to healing, financial records revealing his careful budgeting to provide for Emily, character references from employers praising his work ethic. Each piece added to the portrait of a man who refused to give up, who met every challenge with quiet dignity. The opposing lawyer's dramatic presentation of the fireworks incident now seemed hollow in comparison. Yes, John had experienced a PTSD episode, but he'd immediately sought help afterward, installed better coping mechanisms, and been honest about his struggles. That wasn't weakness, it was responsibility. Rebecca picked up her brother's photograph, touching the glass over his smiling face. Tommy had died alone in a foreign land, his potential forever unlived. But John Miller had made it home, carrying similar burdens, fighting not just for survival but for the chance to give his daughter a good life. "The world failed you, Tommy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We didn't understand what you and your fellow soldiers carried. We didn't give you the support you deserved." She set the photo down gently, squaring her shoulders with new resolve. "I will not fail this man as the world failed my brother." The clock struck 1, but Judge Lawson kept reading, determined to know every detail, to understand every aspect of John Miller's story. This wasn't just about law anymore. It was about justice tempered with mercy, about recognizing the quiet heroes who fought their battles long after leaving the battlefield. She would have to maintain her judicial objectivity tomorrow, but tonight, in the solitude of her chambers, Rebecca Lawson was remembering why she'd become a judge in the first place: to make a difference, to protect those who deserved protection, to see beyond the surface of cases to the human hearts at their center. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but her path was clear. The same system that had failed her brother now had a chance to stand up for another soldier, not out of pity, but out of recognition of his true worth and character. She closed the last file and reached for her brother's photo one final time. Touching it to her heart, she whispered, "I will not fail this man, as the world failed my brother." The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as people packed the wooden benches. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floor. John Miller sat at the defendant's table, his recently pressed suit a gift from his church community. His fingers touched the folded crayon drawing in his pocket Emily's artwork, giving him strength. Across the aisle, the opposing lawyer lounged in his expensive chair, a smug smile playing at his lips. He shuffled papers with manicured hands, occasionally glancing at John with barely concealed disdain. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the chamber. Judge Rebecca Lawson entered, her black robes flowing as she took her seat. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice firm but lacking its former edge of cynicism. Her eyes swept the crowded room before landing on John. The opposing lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we've already established Mr. Miller's instability. The fireworks incident. If I may, Your Honor?" A gentle voice interrupted. Mrs. Carter, John's elderly neighbor, stood shakily with her cane. "I was there that night of the fireworks." The judge nodded for her to continue. "Yes, John was startled by the noise. But do you know what he did? He grabbed Emily and protected her, shielding her with his body. That's not dangerous behavior, that's a father's love." More hands raised throughout the courtroom. Emily's teacher, Miss Thompson, spoke next.
"Emily is the most well-adjusted child in my class.
She's always clean, well-fed, and her homework is always done. She talks about their nightly reading sessions and weekend park visits." The lawyer tried to interject, but the judge held up her hand.
"I'd like to hear from others."
A gruff-looking veteran in dress uniform stood. "I served with Miller in Afghanistan. The day he earned that Silver Star, he ran through enemy fire 3 times to save wounded men. That same courage and dedication, he brings it to fatherhood." Pastor Roberts spoke of John's tireless work at the church. The grocery store owner described how John would count pennies to ensure Emily had fresh fruit. A school counselor detailed his perfect attendance at every parent-teacher conference. The opposing lawyer grew increasingly frustrated. "Your Honor, these emotional appeals don't change the facts. Mr. Miller's PTSD." "PTSD isn't a crime," another veteran interrupted from the gallery. "It's a wound earned in service. Miller never missed a therapy session. He's doing everything right." The judge turned to John. "Mr. Miller, would you like to address the court?" John stood slowly, his hands steady. The courtroom fell silent. He pulled Emily's drawing from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. "Your Honor, I'm not a perfect father. Some nights, dinner is just sandwiches. Sometimes I wake up from nightmares. But every decision I make, every odd job I take, every struggle I face, it's all for Emily." His voice grew stronger. "When my wife died, I promised her I'd give our daughter the best life possible. Not the richest or the fanciest, but one filled with love, stability, and faith." He held up the crayon drawing. "Emily drew this in foster care. It's us, holding hands, with the words, 'Don't give up.' That's who we are. We don't give up on each other. I've learned that asking for help isn't weakness. This community, these people, they've become our extended family." John's voice cracked slightly. I may have earned a silver star in combat, but my greatest honor is being Emily's father. Every day, I work to be worthy of that privilege. I'm not asking for special treatment because I'm a veteran. I'm asking for the chance to keep being the dad my daughter believes in." The opposing lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this emotional manipulation—" "Counsel!" Judge Lawson's voice cut through his protest. "I've heard enough from you." She removed her glasses and studied the courtroom, taking in the faces of neighbors, teachers, veterans, and community members who had come to support John. She straightened in her chair, drew a deep breath, and prepared to deliver her verdict. Judge Rebecca Lawson adjusted her glasses, her stern expression softening as she looked down at the papers before her. The courtroom fell into complete silence, so quiet you could hear the old ceiling fan creaking above. "Before I deliver my ruling," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong through the hushed room, "I want to address something that deeply troubles me about this case." She turned her gaze to the opposing lawyer, who sat smugly shuffling his papers. "Counselor, in my 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated attempt to weaponize a veteran's combat trauma against them. Your efforts to paint Mr. Miller's PTSD as a danger, rather than recognizing it as a sacrifice made in service to our country, is not only legally questionable, but morally reprehensible." The lawyer's smug expression faltered. Judge Lawson continued, her voice taking on an edge of controlled anger.
You took one incident, a man's natural reaction to sounds that reminded him of combat, and twisted it into a narrative of danger.
You chose to ignore the hundreds of days of loving care, the countless moments of sacrifice, the unwavering dedication of a father to his daughter. She paused, removing her glasses and looking directly at John. "Mr. Miller, I owe you an apology. When you first stood in my courtroom, I laughed. I dismissed you. I failed to see what was right in front of me. A man of honor trying his best to raise his daughter while carrying burdens most of us can't imagine." John's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. Mrs. Carter, sitting in the row behind him, reached forward and squeezed his shoulder. "This court has reviewed extensive testimony from Mr. Miller's fellow soldiers, his neighbors, his daughter's teachers, and his church community. We have seen a man who, despite struggling with PTSD and financial hardship, has created a loving, stable home for his daughter. A man who attends therapy, who works multiple jobs, who never misses a parent-teacher conference." The judge picked up a familiar piece of paper, Emily's school essay. "We've heard from the person whose opinion matters most in this case." Emily Miller wrote, and I quote, "My daddy is my hero not because he has a medal, but because he makes me feel safe and loved every single day." Tears welled in John's eyes as he heard his daughter's words read aloud. In the back of the courtroom, Emily sat with her temporary foster mother, clutching her worn doll tightly. Judge Lawson squared her shoulders, her voice taking on the formal tone of official ruling. "It is the finding of this court that John Miller is not only a fit parent but an exemplary one. His dedication to his daughter's well-being, his commitment to personal growth, and his demonstrated resilience make him precisely the kind of father any child would be fortunate to have." She paused, looking directly at Emily. "Therefore, I am immediately restoring full custody of Emily Miller to her father, with all previous allegations dismissed." The sharp crack of the gavel had barely sounded before the courtroom erupted in applause. People stood, cheering and crying. Mrs. Carter hugged John from behind, and the pastor pumped his fist in the air. But John didn't notice any of it. His eyes were fixed on Emily, who had already broken free from her foster mother's grasp and was running down the center aisle, her small feet pounding against the wooden floor. "Daddy!" she cried out, launching herself toward him. John caught her in his arms, lifting her high into the air as she squealed with delight. Tears streamed down his face as he spun her around, their laughter mixing together in a joyful symphony. Emily's arms wrapped tight around his neck, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, her own small body shaking with happy sobs. "I knew you'd win, Daddy," she whispered into his ear. "Heroes always win." John held her closer, spinning slower now, their hearts beating in sync. The sunshine through the courthouse windows wrapped them in warm light. Father and daughter reunited, their love stronger than any hardship life could throw their way. Around them, the applause continued. But to John and Emily, it was just background noise to their own private celebration. They were home, in each other's arms, exactly where they belonged. The morning sun peeked through the blinds of their small apartment, casting warm stripes across the kitchen table where John and Emily sat finishing their breakfast. It was their first morning together since the judge's ruling, and everything felt different, lighter somehow. Emily munched happily on her toast, her legs swinging beneath the chair, while John sipped his coffee, savoring the peaceful moment. Her backpack sat ready by the door, and his work clothes were freshly pressed, a far cry from the chaos of recent weeks. "Ready for school, sweetheart?" John asked, watching his daughter carefully wipe crumbs from her mouth with a napkin. She nodded enthusiastically, her pigtails bouncing. "I can't wait to tell Miss Thompson that I'm back home with you forever," Emily beamed, her smile bright enough to light up the whole room. John felt his heart swell at her words. Forever. It still didn't feel quite real. They cleaned up breakfast together, falling into their familiar routine as if they'd never been apart. Emily hummed a little tune while drying the dishes John handed her, and he found himself joining in, their voices mixing in an off-key but joyful duet. As John helped Emily into her jacket, Mrs. Carter from next door knocked on their door. "Good morning, Millers," she called out cheerfully, holding a fresh-baked loaf of banana bread. "Just wanted to welcome our favorite neighbors back properly." Emily rushed to hug the elderly woman's legs, while John accepted the bread with grateful thanks. "You've always been too kind to us, Mrs. Carter." "Nonsense," she replied, patting Emily's head. "This is what neighbors do." As they stepped out into the hallway, more doors opened. The Rodriguez family from across the hall emerged with bright smiles and waves. "Mr. Peterson from 3B stood in his doorway, offering a crisp salute to John, veteran to veteran. "Welcome home, little one," Mrs. Rodriguez said, squeezing Emily's shoulder. "The building wasn't the same without your laughter in the halls." They made their way down the stairs, and with each floor, they encountered more neighbors. Some offered hugs, others words of encouragement, and a few simply nodded respectfully. John felt overwhelmed by the show of support, realizing how many people had been silently rooting for them all along. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean. The sidewalk in front of their building was unusually crowded. Pastor Green stood waiting, his kind face creased with joy. Behind him, several members of their church congregation had gathered, holding welcome home signs and small gifts. "John, Emily," the pastor stepped forward, embracing them both in a warm hug. "God is good, isn't he?" "He sure is, Pastor," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's sure island." Emily tugged at her father's sleeve, pointing excitedly. "Look, Daddy, Miss Thompson is here too." Indeed, Emily's teacher had come by before school, clutching Emily's "My Daddy is My Hero" essay in her hands. "We'll be hanging this in the hallway at school," she announced proudly, "as an example of true courage, both yours and your father's." The impromptu gathering turned into a small celebration. Church members passed out muffins and coffee, neighbors shared stories and laughter, and Emily basked in the attention, never letting go of John's hand. A black sedan pulled up quietly at the curb, and Judge Lawson stepped out, dressed casually instead of her usual court attire. The crowd parted respectfully as she approached John and Emily. "I hope you don't mind the informal visit," she said softly, her usual stern demeanor replaced with genuine warmth. "I wanted to see you both, outside those courthouse walls." John straightened instinctively. "Not at all, Your Honor. Rebecca," she corrected gently. "Please." She knelt down to Emily's level. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "I'm really happy," Emily replied, squeezing her father's hand. "I knew Daddy would win because he's a hero." The judge stood, meeting John's eyes. "Thank you for your service," she said, her voice carrying weight beyond the simple phrase. "Both in uniform and as a father, my brother would have been proud to serve alongside someone like you." John nodded, understanding the depth of what wasn't being said. "Thank you, Rebecca, for seeing the truth." She touched his arm briefly before stepping back. "Take good care of each other." The gathering slowly dispersed as people headed off to work and school. Pastor Green offered one final prayer of blessing, and Mrs. Carter promised to check in later with a proper dinner. John and Emily started their walk to school, their joined hands swinging between them. The morning sun had risen fully now, painting the street in golden light. Emily skipped every few steps, her pigtails bouncing with each hop. "See, Daddy?" she said, looking up at him with pure joy in her eyes. "Heroes win." John squeezed her small hand, remembering all the dark moments when he'd almost lost hope. But here they were, walking together in the sunlight, surrounded by love and support from their community. His daughter's faith had never wavered, and now he understood why. They paused at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Emily wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug, and John bent down to kiss the top of her head. The morning sun warmed their faces as they stood together, ready to step into their new beginning. The crossing signal changed, and father and daughter moved forward together, their shadows stretching long behind them in the golden morning light. Each step felt like a victory, each moment a gift, as they walked toward their brighter tomorrow. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of John Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.